The ancient Greeks whispered of a land beyond the north wind, a place without sickness, without war, where fields gave endless harvests, and where people lived not for decades, but for thousands of years. They called it Hyperborea, but were they really people at all, or something else? To the Greeks, Hyperborea was paradise. To modern historians, it is a myth. But what if it was neither? What if it was memory? About 2,500 years ago, the historian Herodotus wrote that gifts for Apollo's temple on Delos were said to come from a people beyond the north wind, the Hyperboreans. What made this strange was the detail. The offerings were wrapped in wheat straw and passed hand to hand across many lands, as if part of a ritual supply line. Myths rarely come with instructions. This sounded like memory. Other writers painted Hyperborea as a paradise. Pindar told of people who lived free of war and sickness, dining in the company of Apollo. Diodorus described a northern island where the sun shone for half the year, crowned by a spherical temple. Even skeptics repeated the accounts, as if unwilling to erase them. And one detail is impossible to ignore. Hyperborea was said to be a land where the sun never set. To the Greeks, that was miracle. To us, it is geography. Above the Arctic Circle, daylight lingers for weeks, sometimes months. Could this be coincidence? Or does it hint that whispers of the far north reached Greece long before explorers set sail? We know that around 2,300 years ago, Pytheas of Massalia traveled into the Atlantic and returned with a tale of Thule, a place where the summer sun never set and the sea turned to slush. His words echo the Hyperborean myth almost too closely. Which came first, the legend that inspired the voyage, or the voyage that confirmed the legend? But Hyperborea was not only a land of light, it was a land of abundance. Writers claimed the Hyperboreans lived 1,000 years. They knew no crime, no famine, no law, because none was needed. Death, when it came, was said to be chosen. They ended their lives laughing, leaping into the sea. For the Greeks, who lived with hunger, plague, and war, this was a vision of everything their world was not. Yet Hyperborea was not faceless. Legends speak of Abaris the Hyperborean, a wandering priest, healer, and prophet. He carried a golden arrow said to be given by Apollo, with which he healed the sick and crossed the earth without eating. Was Abaris invention, or a memory of knowledge carried south from a forgotten north? Many call Hyperborea a utopia projected onto unreachable lands. But if it was only a dream, why the specific names? Why the ritual offerings? Why the detail of the midnight sun? Why did Herodotus, cautious even as he recorded marvels, choose to preserve the story instead of dismissing it? Archaeology adds to the puzzle. Around 9,000 years ago, hunters on Zhukov Island in the Siberian Arctic bred sled dogs and moved supplies across sea ice, an organized logistics system deep in the frozen north. Around 7,000 years ago, vast rock carvings along the White Sea etched boats, hunts, and star-like symbols into stone. An entire coastline turned into a map of memory. And nearly 12,000 years ago, the Shigir idol was carved in the Urals, the world's oldest wooden monument, covered in mysterious symbols. These discoveries prove the North was never empty. It was inhabited by organized, symbol-rich cultures capable of preserving knowledge. So was Hyperborea just a paradise of poetry? Or was it the cultural memory of northern peoples whose rituals and discoveries filtered south through trade, travel, and myth, until the Greeks believed they came from a land of light itself? What is certain is that Hyperborea never faded. The name survived. It passed through centuries, resurfacing in maps, in esoteric texts, in the guarded doctrines of secret societies. And when those societies began to treat Hyperborea not as legend but as lost history, the myth shifted again. It was no longer a paradise. It was a key. And in the 20th century, men with armies and ideologies would reach for that key and try to use it. Hyperborea should have remained a curiosity of ancient Greece, a myth of eternal daylight, a name spoken by poets. But in the late 1800s it returned, reborn not in temples, but in secret lodges and occult halls. Europe was restless. Archaeologists unearthed ruins older than scripture. New sciences hinted at worlds before history, and mystics claimed to speak with voices from beyond. In this climate, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society, gave Hyperborea new life. Her vast book, The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888, declared that humanity had passed through great cycles of time. She described root races, civilizations rising and falling over tens of thousands of years. The second of these, she wrote, lived in Hyperborea. They were not men as we know them, but luminous beings, vast in size and in wisdom, who spoke without words and lived in harmony with cosmic forces. Hyperborea, in her vision, was not a metaphor. It was history, erased, but waiting to be remembered. To scholars, this was fantasy. To her followers, it was revelation. Societies across Europe seized on the idea. Lecturers filled halls with talk of northern homelands. Maps were drawn showing vanished continents at the poles. Lodges hung symbols on their walls, swirling suns, polar emblems, signs they believed had come down from Hyperborea itself. The myth was changing. The Greeks had imagined paradise. Theosophy declared a prehistoric civilization. Secret societies went further. Hyperborea became proof of ancestry, evidence of a divine bloodline carried by chosen peoples. Police files from the early 1900s mention occult groups obsessed with lost northern continents and superior races. These movements were not dismissed as harmless. Myths, once organized into doctrine, could move men, and men could move nations. One group in Munich carried the myth further than most. They called themselves the Thule Society, after the legendary northern land described by Pythias more than 2,000 years earlier. To them, Thule and Hyperborea were one and the same, a lost homeland, hidden beyond ice and time. Their members believed they were heirs to that homeland. They studied ancient runes as coded fragments of Hyperborean wisdom. They spoke of hidden masters, descendants of the north who still guided human destiny. They took the swastika, an ancient solar symbol, and recast it as their emblem of racial fate. Here Hyperborea ceased to be a dream. It became justification. If Hyperborea had existed, then its bloodlines could be traced. If it had fallen, its knowledge could be recovered. Paradise had become a claim of power. The Thule Society's gatherings were part ritual, part political salon. From their ranks came men who would go on to shape the Nazi Party. Through them, the myth of Hyperborea slipped from the candlelit lodge into the bloodstream of the Reich, and that changed everything. Because once the Reich adopted the myth, it no longer remained theory. It became mission. The paradise beyond the north wind had been reborn as an ancestral homeland, and those who believed it vowed to find it again, by any means necessary, and so the hunt began. By the 1930s, Hyperborea was no longer just the dream of poets or the doctrine of mystics. For the leaders of the Reich, it was a destination. The Thule Society's visions had already seeped into politics. When the SS created its research branch, the Ahnenerbe, or Ancestral Heritage Institute, myth acquired money, maps, and marching orders. Officially, the Institute's mission was to study the history and culture of the Aryan race. Unofficially, it became a vehicle for something far stranger, the search for traces of a lost northern homeland. The hunt took three directions: east into the Himalayas, north into the Arctic, and inward beneath the earth. In 1938, a team led by zoologist Ernst Schaefer entered Lhasa. To the outside world, it was a scientific expedition, collecting plants, photographing monasteries, recording dialects. But the crates they carried home were filled not only with specimens, but with scrolls, skull measurements, and symbols copied from temple walls. Some accounts claim they sought connections between Tibetan legends of hidden kingdoms and the Hyperborean myth. North, into the polar ice, German weather stations sprouted on remote islands and frozen archipelagos: Franz Josef Land, Novaya Zemlya, Svalbard. Officially, these were strategic outposts for U-boat operations. But within the Ahnenerbe, the Arctic was more than a battlefield. It was a symbol, a land of endless day, where ancient memory said Hyperborea had once flourished. In some reports, the Arctic stations are described not just as military posts, but as listening stations, watching the ice for signs of things older than war. Teams of archaeologists and speleologists combed caves and ancient sites across Europe, documenting runes, carvings, and prehistoric artifacts. Some finds were ordinary, others seemed to confirm what believers already expected: spirals, suns, and star wheels that echoed the solar symbols of the Hyperborean myth. A cavern wall marked with an ancient wheel could be dismissed as coincidence. But at Wewelsburg Castle, the SS's ritual headquarters, Those same symbols were carved into the floor of the Hall of the Black Sun. The paper trail is cautious. Official reports speak of ethnography, climate science, and archaeology, but between the lines are hints of something more. One file praises an expedition for uncovering materials of ideological value. Another notes evidence of northern transmission, fragments, hints, enough to keep the myth alive. What exactly did they find? Publicly, Schaefer published scientific studies on Tibet's flora and fauna, but rumors whispered of other returns: a chart showing lands beneath a pale sun, a scroll describing cycles of light and darkness, fragments of a map of the north that no modern cartographer recognized. In the Arctic, weather crews sent transmissions until the very end of the war, months after Berlin had fallen, as if the north itself could not be abandoned. Skeptics argue these were nothing more than routine operations twisted into legend, and perhaps they were. But here is the darker truth. The Reich did not need to prove Hyperborea. It only needed to believe. For once belief hardened into ideology, the search itself became a weapon. The Ahnenerbe turned myths into marching orders. If Hyperborea had once existed, its bloodlines could be traced. If it had fallen, its knowledge could be rebuilt. Expeditions became evidence. Evidence became conviction. Conviction became policy. By the end of the war, crates of artifacts, scrolls, and notes were scattered across collapsing Germany. Some were seized by the Allies, others by the Soviets. Many vanished. What remains are fragments, photographs of symbols, half-translated manuscripts, references to missing files. Enough to raise questions, never enough to answer them. Did the Reich truly find traces of Hyperborea? Or did it construct a narrative from shadows to justify its ambitions? The archives are silent, but silence is not the same as absence. What we do know is this: when Berlin fell in 1945, the myth of Hyperborea did not die with it. It slipped into the Cold War, carried in seized documents and whispered in intelligence circles. And from there it began a new life, in rumors of hidden Arctic bases, lost maps, and knowledge too dangerous to release. Hyperborea had been paradise, then doctrine, then mission. Now, it was a secret. When Berlin fell in 1945, crates of Ahnenerbe files were seized, laboratories were stripped, artifacts packed into boxes, but some shipments never turned up. Reports spoke of cargo trains sealed before Allied troops arrived, manuscripts logged in archives that vanished without a trace. The silence made intelligence officers wonder what had slipped away. Both East and West began sifting through what remained. American intelligence compiled lists of Ahnenerbe projects. The Soviets hauled entire archives to Moscow, where many remained sealed. Among the fragments were rune studies, maps of the polar seas, and notes that mentioned Hyperborea. None of it proved the myth, yet none of it explained why so much was hidden. And then came the rumors, each stranger than the last. First came the sky. In the late 1940s, Allied pilots flying over the Arctic reported glowing orbs that danced beside their planes. They were not stars, not flares. They moved with intent, as if watching. The reports echoed the Foo Fighters of the war, lights that had never been explained, natural phenomena, or something inherited from Reich experiments. Then came the ice. In 1947, Admiral Richard Byrd led Operation Highjump, a massive U.S. Navy expedition to Antarctica. Officially, it was training, but Byrd himself gave a chilling statement. He warned of a new enemy that could strike at incredible speed, from pole to pole. His words barely made the papers, yet they have never faded from rumor. Some still believe his fleet encountered more than snow and ice. And finally, the maps. Soviet patrols around Novaya Zemlya reported islands that appeared one month and were gone the next. Phantom coastlines, drawn and erased. At the same time, Soviet scientists logged magnetic anomalies that no one could explain. On paper, these were navigational errors, but off the record, some whispered that the North still guarded secrets, and that those secrets may have been touched by Ahnenerbe hands. 3 waves of mystery: lights in the Arctic sky, shadows beneath Antarctic ice, phantom islands in the Soviet North. The myth of Hyperborea had changed again. It was no longer just a paradise, or a doctrine, or even a mission. Now it was a classified subject, a name buried in sealed files, a word that surfaced in intelligence briefings and in the margins of declassified reports. And that may be the most unsettling truth of all, because myths usually fade when exposed. Hyperborea did not. It slipped from poetry to doctrine, from ideology to secrecy, until it pulsed through the Cold War like a signal waiting to be decoded. And signals, once sent, are never silent.